Hello, everybody. I'm so excited. So welcome to the Cackle. This is EntryPoint's weekly interview series where we highlight small businesses and startups and people having an impact on our community. And today we're talking about startup trends to watch in 2021. And so if you have any questions or resources or comments about anything we're talking about, feel free to drop them in the comments. And joining us today is a blast from the past. I have not talked to him in so long, so I'm so excited to catch up with him. Mahendra Ramsinghani. He is the managing director at Secure Octane. He's also the author of The Business of Venture Capital, and he co-authored a book with Brad Feld called Startup Boards. And so, hey, how are you?
Great to see you, Emily. It's been 100 years.
I know. I was like, this is going to be so fun.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for bringing back fond memories of Michigan, a place where, I have spent 10 years of my 20-year career in the United States.
I feel like I pretty much like every 3 years or so, I'm like, oh, Mahendra, I should contact him. I think we did a video for us for Mike Finney. He won a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I think that was probably the last time we talked, as I was trying to get you to film a video to like send in for that video. It's like always the most random stuff. I'm like, hey, yo, do you want to be on the Cackle? You're like, what are you talking about? I'm in California trying to live life.
I like the name, the Cackle. It's so it embodies your personality. It embodies all the things that of who you are, and of course the conversation, which is fun. And we shouldn't take life so seriously, no matter what happens.
I know. It's funny because I thought the same thing. My friend Fadi, we were at a cabin up north, and he was just like, we were calling this the weekly Q&A. And he was just like, look, I have something really serious to talk to you about. Like, you cannot keep calling that the weekly Q&A. That's the most boring thing I've ever heard. And he came up with the name The Cackle. And I was like, that's so unprofessional and sexist. And he's like, no, I think it's actually really good. And then I was like, I think it is actually. And then it like stuck just like immediately. As soon as I said it one time on the show, people started being like, can I be on The Cackle? And I was like, oh God.
Excellent.
So
this has been your own entrepreneurial journey, actually, from MBCA to becoming a host.
I would be like, what am I? You're becoming a whatever it is you do now.
We're all trying to figure out, and like my daughter says, so what should I be when I grow up? I was like, don't worry, I don't know what I want to be. I'm still trying to figure that out.
That's so true. I feel like I used to, like, even in college, have this very, like, I was like, I'm going to go into public accounting. I'm going to, like, be a partner at a public accounting firm. And then it was, like, a year into doing that I was like, this is a mistake. I've ruined my life. And then since then, I've been a little bit more like, yeah, if you're, like, doing things that you enjoy doing, you kind of are moving towards a goal. And so, like, I feel like I'm just, like, entrepreneurship fangirl. EntryPoint, yay! So it works out. Okay, before it turns into like the Emily interview where Mahendra interviews Emily, tell everyone about like your background. So you're an investor, you're an author, you're doing a lot of things. So talk a little bit about your background so people kind of know.
So Emily, did you grow up in Michigan?
Oh my gosh, no!
So my background, I grew up in India and did my engineering, got an MBA. And back in the day, you only had two professions or two career paths you could choose from. Either you be an engineer or a doctor. And if you're neither of those, then your parents are kind of disappointed that you turned out to be a loser. So I picked one. I couldn't stand the sight of blood, and I'm like, okay, engineering, I think I can figure this out. And so I wasn't a very good engineer, and my saving grace was when I joined MBA, it was just a very smooth sailing from me from that point on. So I got a double major, both in finance and marketing. I said, someday I'll figure out a way to combine all these three things where There's the business side of things, there's the engineering side of things. And then my life sort of evolved as I moved to Singapore, where I worked for a few years in Singapore and joined an early stage tech company that started to grow very rapidly. And it went public eventually in the Singapore Stock Exchange. So I had my little bit of exposure on how you build a company. That was employee number like 4 or 5. And by the time it went public, it had well over 100 employees. And, this was in the late 90s. So you got a chance of like building sales marketing businesses for a very rapidly growing company. And then, of course, I moved to Michigan in 2000, 99, 2000. And that's where my journey into the Michigan Economic Development Corporation started. And thanks to McFinney, we started to think about what can we do for venture capital. And one of the first conversations we had in that process was with Jane Garfinkel, who was raising her Fund One.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Back to the day.
Yeah, and now Jan is raising, or has probably already raised, Fund 5.
Yeah, I think they have about 700 million under management now. So it's like,
it's some astronomical number, which is awesome for Jan and awesome for Jan. And thanks to the vision that Mike Finney had for the foundation we could lay in Michigan.
Yeah, definitely. I know now he's in California or not in California, Florida, living it up.
Yeah.
Somewhere warm. I'm like, just begrudge all of you while I'm here in the winter.
So all the people on the East Coast have started to move to Miami, and all the people on the West Coast have started to move to Austin. So those are the two hotbeds that the pandemic has sort of led to.
Yeah, it does seem like I've recently talked to a lot of people who are like, oh, you're calling from San Francisco, and they're like, oh no, I'm and then they're like listing off all these like random places across the country where they're pandemicking, as I like to say. So it's so interesting. But yeah, so you were at MEDC, and you guys kind of like, you were creating programs to help increase venture capital under management in Michigan, and ultimately do more investments in the tech companies across the state. And then you left there and you started the First Step Fund, right?
Yeah, it was a very interesting and a challenging time. This was the post 2008 crisis. GMA filed for bankruptcy, and several foundations in Southeast Michigan came together and said, "What can we do to support entrepreneurs?" And so they worked very closely with Invest Detroit Foundation and David Blaskowitz, who's my favorite boss. There's Mike Finney at MEDC, and there's Dave Blaskowitz.
Well, that was pretty lucky there.
Yeah.
I must have done both from that good combination.
Yeah, and I must have done something right, because Dave always would watch my back and always would be so. He was like the best manager in terms of hands off. But every time you're in trouble, I'll come and make sure that I get you out of trouble. And that happened a few times. But at Invest Detroit, it was a small experiment. We said, what can we do to start to put small amounts in the hands of entrepreneurs in Southeast Michigan? And these need not be only tech entrepreneurs. They can be entrepreneurs that are doing stuff that is important in Detroit. So I remember in 2 years, we invested in almost 40, 50 different companies.
Yeah.
Pretty brisk pace. I think that's one thing that we, were very good at, is how can we make decisions very quickly and not in the time scale where it takes months, 6 months, 9 months to make a decision. We had the ability to take risk, but we also had some degree of freedom. So our investment committee, which is chaired by Chris Isaac, was very supportive, was very open to saying, how can we move quickly to make sure that Detroit becomes a thriving entrepreneurial hotbed? So those were some very interesting times.
Yeah, and I think you were like really integral in a lot of the things in Michigan that kind of helped really like kick off the growth of the tech community here, because you were really involved in, there was a state, I don't want to say sponsored, like a state funded fund of funds, which is something that, like a fund of funds, for people who don't have any idea what I'm talking about, is like something where it's a pool of money that's managed by a certain organization that then invests in different venture capital firms who have different kind of investment focuses, but are experts at like sort of figuring out which companies are doing the best in different sectors and then can then invest in those companies. And so like you were really involved in that. And that was like a $250 million initiative that the state of Michigan partnered with a couple different organizations on. And then you were also like, I feel like First Step Fund was kind of like one of the very first like really early stage funds that like so many like successful larger companies that are around today or that have like spun off into like a bunch of different companies were originally got their first or second round of funding from the First Step Fund. And you guys did like so many good investments. It's like such a Invested Trade has like a sneaky good portfolio. I'm always like, you guys are so good.
Patty, I think, I kind of always feel a little bad for Patty because, the pace at which we invested was great. We built a very nice big portfolio, and then Patty inherited it after I moved. And I'm sure there were times when she wondered, like, what was Mahendra thinking when he did this investment?
She does the same thing. So it's so funny because like she has the tech stabilization fund where they made like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure it was right around a bajillion investments. And then they like done so much stuff with like the First Capital Fund and stuff. So I feel like it's kind of, she must have liked what you did because I think a lot of what they do is like kind of legacy to a lot of the things that, Invested Trade's always been core focus on. Yeah. Which is great. Like you guys have had so many quality people like you and Adrian Fortino and Adrian Omer and Patty and Martin. Like, I feel like it's always been like such a good team and not all of you even overlapped. It's just been like
well, there's a secret, Emily, how all of these people came around in West Detroit. And do you know what who is the person responsible for all that?
I'm trying to think of who it could be. No, who? Dave Blasquez? Who?
It's Chris. Of course, Dave is the man who keeps everything together. But, Chris Ryzik would every now and then say, Mahendra, there is this great entrepreneur you should talk to. And
that's so funny because that is like, wait a second.
Adrian Fortino came from Chris Ryzik.
Yeah.
Him. And then Patty Glazer, of course, is used to work with Chris Ryzik. And so there are people who behind the scenes do this kind of work that they never get any recognition for. So part of your and my objective is to make sure that we can shine the spotlight on such people.
I haven't even had Chris Ryzik on the Cackle yet. Oh no. He's like, I think I've literally almost had every single other of those people. He's just like,
Actually, is overdue in reaching.
I know. He's like, I brought people into this community and I can take them out. I'm like, no, don't poke the bear. Chris Ryzik is so awesome. I wonder what he's doing right now.
Yeah.
During this election time, I haven't caught up with him in a bit. Okay, so you have spent a really great amount of time and done a lot of stuff in Michigan and in the Midwest, and then you have spent the latter part of your career in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. What would you say kind of are like the differences between the two communities, or kind of similarities, or what would you say about like that transition?
No, so I was, having spent 10 years in Michigan and now 10 years in San Francisco, it's quite a stark sort of contrast of people. It's a stark contrast of the amount of capital that flows, and of course, the kind of craziness that you see that comes with large amounts of capital. And when I was in Michigan, a lot of my friends would talk about Midwestern values. And of course, I was in the Midwest. I came to the United States and landed in Lansing, Michigan. So I had no context of what those Midwestern values meant. Because it's like, if you ask a fish, what is water? The fish would say, oh, it's all around me. Like, what are you talking about? But the moment they take fish out of water, Then the fish knows, oh, well, that is water. I need to get back in there. Otherwise, I'm
Yeah,
going to,
that's interesting.
So to my, my appreciation for Midwestern values was heightened after I moved away from the Midwest because guess what? When people don't do exactly the way you're supposed to treat each other, that is with professionalism and care and competence and compassion, all of those good things. Then you say, wonder, well, what is going on? And of course, here in the Bay Area, there is no paucity of capital. In Michigan, we're trying to solve that very problem: is how can we get more capital? Because there's no paucity of capital, it tends to attract a lot of people, and it also tends to create relationships that are fairly transactional, or, in my opinion, relatively weak. I've known Chris Isaac. I've known you. Some of my best relationships and friendships are in Michigan, and here I would say, yeah, I've built my friendships and built my relationships, but it's a very different dynamic, and especially it's because it's such a melting pot. It is such a lot of it is driven by speed, and especially when you have speed and everybody's trying to get ahead, the compassion and some of the foundational elements of building relationships sometimes fall to the wayside. I think that's one big difference that I see is like, uh, you know,
Yeah.
how people work with each other in Michigan. You've got a long-term problem-solving team. I mean, think about the Venture Michigan Fund. It took 7 years, Emily, for that legislation to get passed. It started in a Republican administration, and it was completed in a Democratic administration. And governors changed, treasurers changed, but the core group just stuck with it and was able to get it past the finish line. And when I think about, in this day and age, bipartisans working together for
Yeah.
gee, that sounds like such a novel concept,
Yeah, exactly. Now it is kind of like, what? That seems like such a far cry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, I like that. I've never heard that, the transactional comparison though, but that does seem like it rings pretty true.
It's like, what can you do for me? And if you can't do something for me, then thank you so much for calling, and so on.
Yeah.
That's one part of the entrepreneurial dynamic. The other part, which I found to be very refreshing and very supportive, and that's what builds these ecosystems, is that once people achieve a certain modicum of success, then their generosity is and philanthropy, whether it's supporting people, is very different. So I'll give you a few examples. If I had to reach somebody who's is a highly accomplished individual, like for example, yesterday I was able to speak with the former chief security officer of Intel. Under normal circumstances, it would be very difficult for me to try and reach somebody of that kind. But here I reached out to a friend and said, this gentleman, do you think you can make an introduction? Because that's my world of investments. And I think this person, his name is Malcolm Harkins. Malcolm would be a very, supportive, he's like a thought leader. He's written books. It'd be great to speak with him. I was able to get on the phone with him very quickly. And he said, sure, what can I do to help you? You're trying to make the digital domain secure. I'd be delighted to, support you in any way I can. And all of this happened in a 30-minute conversation.
Yeah. Wow,
So,
that's interesting.
when you are able to reach people, especially the ones who have, reached a certain point in their lives, the way they can support you is also very different. The way they connect you to people is very different. And so I feel like the good part that I see is that the openness and the connections and the ability to sort of support. The second part that I see here, which is very different than what I saw in Michigan, is just the sheer scale of ambition. One example that I can quote is I was at a networking event very similar to the one that you had organized when you brought the two here from the Michigan Venture Capital Association.
Yeah.
And I met this entrepreneur, and he was, he said, I'm building a company that most investors will be, not necessarily open to. I said, tell me more about what company you're building. He said, I'm building a company that is going to mine precious metals from asteroids. I was like, whoa, these asteroids are flying in space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, okay.
Yeah. and you're going to find a way to land on them. You're going to find a way to very
Yeah.
quickly, scrape whatever you can to say, oh, there is gold here or platinum here or not. And if there is something there, then you'll figure out a way to drill a hole, scoop it out, and bring it back to Earth. And I'm like,
Yeah, that does sound like just so like, what?
yeah, exactly.
Really?
Can we try like to solve something simpler? Like, why do you want to solve this problem? And he almost looked at me like, oh, you're not going to get it at all. You're like, you're not even in the league of the people I want to talk to. And so I kind of pushed him to just get to the bottom of what was driving him to solve this problem. And then when you look at the person's background, you start to weave this interesting thread that, this person has a very good mathematical foundation in his education. This person has always been fascinated by space travel as they were growing up. So when you combine all of these things, that with sheer scale of ambition, they don't want to say, hey, mathematics and I might build something in aircraft. No, I want to take as high of a leap that I can and build something that is just staggering in the way it comes across. And so I kind of asked him, like, what if this doesn't work out? He's like, dude, we don't even think that way here. Like, this has to work. We have to make it work. There is no plan B. And so, when you think about both the scale of the ambition and the fact that this entrepreneur has no plan B, I was like, wow, this is truly like, this is where people like Elon Musk and you have that kind of ambition being inspired by those kind of leaders in the modern day, where the entrepreneur says, yeah, I want to try and do something that is, big and crazy. And if it clicks, then I'll be the hero.
Yeah. So devil's advocate, which is probably not a nice thing to do on an interview. It's like, I feel like that's also like very similar to like, that documentary like about Theranos and that whole situation, and how it was just like, she had like had this idea of like, we're going to do this thing that seemed just like so impossible. And like a bunch of people were like, oh, that can't happen. That can't happen. That can't happen. But like the scale of her ambition was like, just kept her going. And I think there is like some, I mean, this is not like San Francisco or Bay Area specific. I think it's like tech ecosystem more broadly, is that like, you kind of have to have that like chutzpah to like, to like get an idea off the ground that is like that unique and be able to execute it. And so like, how do you feel like people balance those two things? Like, what is like just an amazing amount of ambition that's like, taking risks that need to be taken to get something amazing done, versus something that then like ends up being like, oh yeah, they were taking those risks and doing these things and it ended up going nowhere and ended up in this like other zone of like, people now, like with Theranos, people are just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe anyone would have ever. And I'm like, what? That happens all the time. What? That's like every company. Like, what? Yeah. Like, what do you feel like that balance is?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great question, and I don't have a good answer.
Like, I don't know.
It's like you have ambition, and I believe it's very good to have ambition. But when you think about the scale of ambition that somebody wants to mine asteroids, or somebody wants to inhabit Mars, that's a very different scale of ambition. And when you take the example of Theranos, the ambition was, how can I do blood tests very quickly, because the current blood tests take 24 48 hours, and you have to culture it and blah blah blah. And I think there is nothing wrong in having the scale of ambition. Okay. Where things go wrong, and this is just my observation, is when you start to gather resources to meet those ambitions. Okay, you have to gather people, you have to hire people, and you have to get investors to support it. Those are two major resources: people and money. Right now, because sometimes the investors have a certain sort of view of what the entrepreneur should be. They have certain behavioral patterns that, thankfully, all my learning was in the Midwest with, people who are very solid. Sometimes investors lose their, what is their purpose and how should they approach the whole entrepreneurial dynamic. So you have Elizabeth Holmes, who is now trying to imitate Steve Jobs. She actually got a surgery done so that her voice would sound really deep.
Really? I
Yeah,
didn't
this
know
is
that.
all in the book that has come out. This is all in the public domain about
Yeah.
things she did because she could be perceived as this amazing leader, entrepreneur, almost like trying to become like Steve Jobs. So she actually also went and bought those turtlenecks, and she only wore black turtlenecks.
Wow.
So you have this, like this ambition, and now the ambition is starting to play into, gee, I need to raise money. And what do I need to do to raise money? Well, the right thing to do to raise money is to solve the problem in an efficient way, not to dress up like somebody and not to make your voice like somebody. And then this house of cards where, they start to make shit up. They start to use Siemens machines behind the scenes in their basement.
Yeah.
Things starts to fall apart. And
Yeah.
look, any entrepreneur, if they're born with ambition, as long as they have the right values, maybe the Midwestern values, where you don't lie, don't cheat, and make sure that you do good by people, then I feel like they would be the next Henry Fords. They could be the next, Carmanos. Pick any one of our heroes, the next Doug Song, that is out there.
Yeah, that is true. It is kind of like the scales do seem to like tip as soon as you realize that the person's not just ambitious; they're like unethical in trying.
Yeah, yeah. Ethics part is where I think the whole thing falls apart. There is another example, of course, that everybody read about is when you look at a company like Uber, for them they had a great market opportunity, they had amazing growth, but they completely compromised the culture of their company to achieve that growth. And so now there are case studies being written about a company that went public and is valued at $50-some billion, but the board and the CEO, the investors fired the CEO. There are harassments, there are lawsuits, everything you can imagine that could go wrong from a cultural standpoint went wrong. There was no moral compass to growth. And I think when you look at greed and how greed overtakes everything, you even lose the basic thread of, hey, this is about people. We're trying to make a society in which people can work with each other and support each other and make a fair living. And now you have like, oh, the taxi driver is my enemy and I'm going to kill the taxi driver. That's the way to approach a problem, and not necessarily the best way to approach the problem.
Yeah, that is true. That's interesting. Yeah, it is kind of. I think there's a lot of that kind of going around these days too, of just like kind of like pitting different things against each other, and it really isn't like people aren't like more happy for it. They're like more like angry and
Exactly.
all of that.
That's if you look at the state of tech in the modern day, tech is failed to solve some very fundamental problems. Yeah, it's made people rich, and I'm not going to complain. That in terms of how tech benefits the investment side of the house. I mean, if you look at the public markets today, you look at all the tech companies, and their stocks are going through the roof. But the leaders of the tech companies have a moral duty to say, hey, what are things that we can do which are outside of just making profits? How can we as a society try to make sure that these are the parts of the society that have been underserved or ignored or historically not been supported, and how can we get out of our money-making machines and make sure that we're paying attention to some of these sides? And that's a very difficult challenge because
Yeah.
like a drug, you're growing every day, and you're sort of fixated to the stock price, and getting out of that drug machine is very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess how do you see like the tech business landscape shifting this year? Like last year, I guess I say last year, except it's still going on. Like everything has been sort of crazy over the last 12
Yeah.
or 48 months. And and like how do you sort of see things shifting going forward? I think a lot of people are kind of like viewing this like 2021 as like going like on the upswing, like, okay, we see the light at the end of the tunnel here, let's just like zoom up. So how do you see things shifting in the tech community?
So there are two perspectives. One is sort of just the pure entrepreneur / investor perspective, And then there is the macro, I would say, larger perspective. Now, let me start with the larger perspective. Uh, if you look at the way I mean, today is a very special day. We have a new president, that has come on board. But there are 70 million people who are not happy about this, right?
Mhm.
65 million people who voted for President Biden, but 70 million people are not happy about it. It's almost like, you know, one out of every two people, or 50% of the voting population, has a certain, struggle or grievance or unfulfilled need that they saw would be met by, President Trump. What is that, and how do we make sure we understand that, and how do we make sure that those needs can be either met or fulfilled, or even at least talked about or addressed in some way? That's such a massive problem. And when I think about the leadership that our governor Rick Snyder had, I mean, he was clearly one of those individuals who could find ways to work with almost everybody in society and solve problems in a very intelligent way. So when you think about the social problems in our country, it's I'd be very naive, optimistic, or foolish to believe that, oh, the switch is turned on, Biden is president, these 70 million people are going to go to bed. And
Like,
no, I mean, this is a problem that we all need to address in some way. And how exactly do we address it? I don't have an answer, but I think about it a lot. The second thing that I see happening is that, when you think about gender, race, and all of these inequalities that exist in more of the best countries in the world, how can these continue to be healed or continue to be addressed in a way that does not create more division, but creates more, where people feel comfortable and safe to talk to each other. And right now, we can't even talk to somebody without getting into a fist fight.
mhm.
I feel like, has tech caused this problem, or has tech amplified this problem? I don't know whether tech is solely responsible for this problem, but can technology and technology companies find a way to start addressing the problem, and can they start ways to solve this problem or even be a part of the solution? There's certainly room for a lot of those conversations and a lot of those opportunities to grow. But from an investor perspective, I feel like the one or two things that are happening that are pretty obvious is how these geographies where capital used to be concentrated, and hence entrepreneurial ecosystems would be formed, have now started to become more spread out. I believe that there'll be, 10, 15, 20 quote unquote hotspots that will start to emerge over the next 5, 10 years. Which ones are those? I don't know. But all we know is,
Tell me after I hit the no more broadcasting. Then you can tell me we can be rich.
I feel like, look, places like Michigan where, success has come through the work that Doug Song has done, it could certainly become a security hotbed. And I feel like there are narrow windows within which you need to build your infrastructure around those kinds of successes. Because 5 years from today, people have moved on to the next one. And I feel like even when you think about the automotive sector and you think about, electric vehicles, cars, autonomous way driving, and the work that the University of Michigan has done around that track has been built and how these cars can be tested, I feel like there are these foundational elements which can help build each of these geographical regions into something different. So I think obviously that is going to happen. How investors make decisions. All the investments I've done last year have been virtual. I've never had a face-to-face meeting with the founder. So that changes the way we do diligence. That changes the way we, build relationships. It's a lot harder to build very deep ties. I've had the joy of knowing you for well over, 5, 10 years now.
I
But
know, it's probably been like 15. It's like,
and I think about how you can build new relationships. I don't know how we're going to do this in this kind of a virtual environment. So I think from an investment standpoint, it's going to be interesting to see whether how healthcare starts to come back into more mainstream with the new political regime. Energy, Governor Granholm, is did a lot of good work in Michigan in terms of setting the energy and clean tech agenda. And
mhm.
that gets propagated across the country now with this new administration. So obviously there will be shifts that will move into balancing some of this out, that climate control, diversity, and inclusion will start to become much more broader in terms of the themes that we'll see in our investments. And then, of course, my the third edition of my venture capital book comes out in few.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
And I think about how these matters need to be addressed. So, I've included a chapter on culture in venture capital in that edition. So hopefully investors will start to say it's not just about making money; it's about living up to certain values.
Yeah, I think that is really important for people to take into account more, because I think there is like that just like holistic view of building a community that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit as things have gotten so transactional, like you had said earlier. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. When does your book come out?
It should be out in the second week of February. So, by the way, everything I've learned in the book is thanks to Michigan. I learned about venture capital. I learned about fund of funds. I learned about how, you make good decisions. And a lot of people who helped me along the way, whether it's Chris Isaac, Jan Garfinkel, Adrian Fortino, I've included as much as I can from, both Southeast Michigan and West Michigan, Grand Rapids area, where, you get to learn from people and their practices, and then say, okay, there are some best practices. You decide what is best for you, but here are some examples that we can include. And so, I've sort of married all of that with some of the West Coast examples, like Uber, and and woven that into an interesting narrative that hopefully will, benefit the readers.
Where can people go to buy the book?
The one and only Amazon.com.
Oh my God, Amazon! No.
But I was going to say on Main Street in Ann Arbor, there used to be a bookshop, but
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, the Don Treader, I think.
Yeah, the Don Treader. Well, Barnes and Noble wasn't Barnes and Noble?
Right, yeah. Borders. It was
Borders. Sorry, yeah. Borders was the Ann Arbor institution, and yeah, I think and especially to founders and those who are sort of beginning their journey in venture capital, I've tried to sort of include more and more content that will help their journey become a lot more easier and simpler. So hopefully, those who are starting out in venture capital, of course, they can go and read a lot of blogs and read a lot of content online. And what I've done is just compile all of that into something that will be a lot more digestible.
Awesome. Yeah. What is it called? Did you say? I don't think you did.
Business of Venture Capital.
Oh, the Business of Venture Capital. Great.
Yeah,
perfect. Okay, I was like, wait, we have to make sure. I'm not very good on, like, we've had a couple of guests who have books coming out soon, and I'm like, oh, we're on the PR circuit. But then I never know, like, oh yeah, what are the things you're supposed to have your guests say about their book? The name. Where do you buy it? Oh yeah. Emily Heinz. TV host professional. Okay. We're like.
You remember, Emily, that there used to be this, Barbara Walters, and she would sit in a very, sage, they blur the hair, and like her eyelashes would sparkle.
Oh yeah. I've seen clips of her doing
and then she would speak as if like she was a shrink. So, Emily, how do you really feel about it? No. How do you really feel about that?
That is true.
And she wanted to break down and start crying, because all of her guests would dread that,
I know. I have to like watch a couple.
Which is a lot more fun, I'd say. All your guests end up laughing, and they laugh with you, and they leave with joy. And I think that's a much better.
Yeah, dig that, Barbara. I got curls on. Okay, so I know I'm keeping you over. I like how I said that we were going to end on time, and then that was a lie, like a total lie. One more question for you. So in your LinkedIn profile, I noticed it said that you say in like your title that you're an optimist. So as an optimist, like what is your like optimistic view, or like looking forward this next year? Like what are you feeling good about?
Well, I think that today is the day to be optimistic, right? We have a new president coming on board, and we have a semblance of social order that hopefully will start to get established. I feel optimistic that our healthcare and the constraints that we live under when we look at the pandemic and all that has caused to our families and to our society and economy. I feel optimistic about those fundamental things because everything we do sits on top of it. Like all our businesses and commerce and transactions and all of that sits on top of this basic foundation of, do I feel at peace? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel strong? Do I feel like I can go out and have conversations and have dinner or meet friends? And the past 12 months, maybe, or even longer, have challenged all of those basic assumptions. So my hope and prayer is that some of those basics will come back into our society, and we will travel and hang out with people we love and care.
Um,
And every day I get up and say, look, this is one more day I can breathe without an intubation,
yeah, exactly.
good thing. So there are a lot of things we can be optimistic about. To start with, taking a breath of fresh air.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. I like that. That is, and I think a lot of those things too, as we go through the year, people have like heightened stress levels and all of that. And a lot of those, like being able to see friends and like having a little bit more balance in life as kids go back to school, and like not having to do like so many cleaning procedures for a lot of businesses and things like that, I think will help like reduce people's stress levels, get them a little bit more in a good working order so that we can have a good celebration for the New Year's Eve 2021.
I hope we can celebrate it the way we used to celebrate,
Yeah, exactly. Where I go to bed at 7:30.
AM or PM?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe AM. I don't know. After this year, I'll feel like I need to like really live it up, I think, at the end of 2021.
It's also been a good year in so many ways, where we've had a chance to reflect on our lives, reflect on what is important for us, the relationships that really matter, because everything else has been stripped away. Like my job title doesn't matter. The fancy office that I have on the high-rise building does not matter. My, the car, the fancy car that I might drive, you can show off, nobody cares. So we've really been stripped away of all of these false apparitions that we have surrounded ourselves with, to say, okay, what you're trapped in your little cubby with your laptop and people you can talk to. And so that forces us to also reflect and say, what is really important for me in this time? And I think it's been good in so many ways that we've been sort of brought back to the center of gravity in that context.
Yeah, definitely. Like wearing jeans does not matter. Wearing sweatpants is the way to go. I'm like, give me a jeans again. That's going to be good luck to all y'all. I'm like sweatpants forever.
And of course, people are going out for walks a lot more. So sneakers, baking machines. I'm told like last year there was 500% increase in sales of these baking machines all the time, like ovens, whatever. So so many fascinating things have happened in the past 12 months. Like it'll be fun to watch how life continues to evolve from this point. I think we're still in the middle of it. I don't feel like we're completely out of it. And how our behaviors and patterns change for the long term, I don't know, but I think it's fascinating.
That's so interesting. I'm going to be doing so much research on that, I think. Yeah, I also really like how, speaking of like those little changes, I also like how, like, at least here in the Midwest, people are like max Midwesty right now, because if you like are taking a walk outside, people are, hi, oh my gosh, hi, how are you? Like all of that. Like they're just saying so many hellos and greetings to you, like to be like a person.
Exactly. Like, look at that. There's a human being there.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Okay, so next week on the show, we have Adrian Omer, and he is the investment director at the Kresge Foundation. And he and you actually have something in common, because you both are at Invest Detroit before.
Yes. We are alums of the same fantastic institution. And
I know, that'll be so fun. I like how then it's like, I'm like, yeah, I've had everyone on at Invest Detroit almost. And then I was like, except Adrian. Oh, he's on next week. Good.
And it's fascinating that his career has blossomed into such a wonderful place where he was always very ambitious. Every time he and I would talk, and by the way, I spoke with him in the middle of the pandemic, and I could just feel like his both sense of enthusiasm he'd taken on this new role. It's a Kresge, right?
Yeah, Kresge, yeah.
New role, and it's going to be much more bigger. And I think that he is slated for good things. He's very ambitious, very hardworking, and I'm sure the entrepreneur and the investment community will delight in his presence.
Yeah, they have like a great team there too. Rob Manila is their CIO, and John Barker is there, and Adrian, and a few others, and they're just like all just like delightful humans, like doing like so smart. Like every time I'm like, let's compare research, and then I'm like, hey, here's these things, and then they're like, if you look at this very complicated graph over here, I'm like, okay.
That's his life now, to like understand Sharpe ratio and risk quotients and
I was like, that sounds fun. I'm glad you guys do that. I don't.
But Kresge's done a lot of good work in Detroit and Southeast Michigan, and I'm sure, Emily, that you will remind Adrian that he needs to continue to do that work in Southeast Michigan.
Yeah, that's true. I will.
Yeah, you can carry like a stick with him.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that was so delightful having you on. I'm sorry I kept you so much over the timeline that I said I was going to stick to. But it's so great to catch up with you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah. Yay. See you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.